Hey everyone, it's Kimberli from Modern Mess Princess Ministries, and I am officially back. I am so excited to be back here with you guys. It has been one of the most challenging seasons of my life, and I'm sure I'll get into more of the details of it later, but for now, just know it's been a challenge, and I want to thank you for your patience and your steadfastness and your prayers. And even some of you have reached out to me to make sure I'm okay. I am okay. So we're going to turn to Esther today. So you can see that I did this other page. It's dated July 10th. And it was a pretty profound page. And I wasn't really ready to talk about it because I felt like there were just kind of levels of things that I wanted to understand. And then today I turned to Esther chapter 4, which, anyway, super fantastic part of Esther. And these tie in together. So we're going to learn some Bible art journaling tricks. And then we're going to also talk, of course, about how these verses apply to our lives and what we can do with them. The first thing I want to show you is I'm using watercolor paints, which most of us know are really safe in your just standard Bibles, even though the Bible paper is super thin. And you'll see here that I absolutely drench the page. It is like literally I add puddles of water. So what I'm doing is I'm just adding 3 colors, and I want the blue to represent God and his stance in our life. And so of course that comes first, right? And then I wanted purple for bravery. Also because Esther was queen, and purple tends to signify a royal color. So I want to talk about what it takes to be brave even when you're scared, or even when things don't seem to make sense, or even when you're asked to do something you don't want to do, or go somewhere you don't want to go, or are really unsure of the outcome of the journey that you're about to head into. And then I painted some red at the bottom, which is fear. And fear, I painted red because fear is an absolute halt in our plans, right? Fear will stop us dead in our tracks. Even believers, even those of us who know the fact that God is on our side, know that we can be brave because of him. We also can stand in the face of fear, and we have a choice. We can let it win, or we can persevere through and believe that God has a greater purpose. Now you see, I keep adding more and more layers of paint. So really don't worry about saturating your page with water and paint, because I will show you the other side of the page in a bit. I go ahead and use a heat tool that I've had, I kid you not, for over 20 years. So they're definitely a worthwhile investment. But for watercolors, you could use a hairdryer too to go ahead and dry the page. And I'm just going to dry up some of these petals so that I can then go ahead and write on top of them. So in Esther 4, it includes the verse, for you have been chosen for such a time as this. And this applies to my life right now, but it also reminds me of a time in my life where I clearly heard God, I've placed you here for such a time as this. And that was back when I was a therapist. I was working with mostly children and adolescents and their families. And I had a little girl who was getting abused, and the courts, the judge would not protect her. It was the most bizarre thing I've ever experienced in my life. It was so strange. I did not understand. I didn't understand at the time the power that a judge has. Maybe some of you have been through this with your own kids, but I had no idea. This judge would not listen to Child Protective Services. He wouldn't read my counseling notes. He wouldn't hear any of our testimony. He just ruled that this girl is fine and she should be able to continue to go back to her dad's. Showing you a new little tool there that I found. These are Sharpie acrylic paint pens. They are made with acrylic paint on the inside, and they do not bleed through your Bible pages. So they're a fun way to put color on your page. So anyway, so I was literally on my knees praying for this girl because she was being sent back to her dad's weekend after weekend after weekend to be abused over and over and over again. And I remember at the time asking God, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And he said, keep advocating for her. Keep going to the court. Keep going and asking for a review of her records. Keep going. Do not give up. I've placed you here for such a time as this. And in the end, it was scary because you're asking a judge to consider things that he has not considered. I remember begging the girl's attorney to imagine his children in this spot and be brave to go before the judge and ask for these records to be reviewed. I begged Child Protective Services. I begged the district attorney to listen to the case. I called all sorts of people, and it was scary because I had to choose whether I was going to put my neck out on the line for her and risk being told that I was kind of going beyond my scope of competence. But I know I heard God clearly say, even if it costs you everything, advocate for this girl. So I did. And to make the long story short, for some reason, I'm sure it's a God thing, the judge gave up the case after 2 years and gave it to a lower judge in his court. This was the highest judge in the county that wouldn't listen to her case. And he finally just said that he needed to relinquish the case and give it to another judge on the court, which was really odd. But that judge in one day had us all come in, had us all testify, and that girl didn't see her father after that. So praise God for that. But now I'm writing, so now that you know the story, this happened, years and years and years and years ago. Feels like a lifetime ago. But it was such a clear example of where God asked me to trust him, going before the courts, similar to Esther. I wasn't told I would die if I went before the courts, but I was placing myself in a vulnerable position with my profession at the time. But ultimately, protecting a little girl, it didn't matter to me, the consequences of that, as long as I knew I was working hard to protect this little girl. So now I'm going ahead and outlining these words so that they show up better, because the paint pen on the on top of the other color didn't show up super well. This is actually a really good technique to learn how to write bubble letters. So go ahead and write them and then outline them. So if you've always wanted to learn how to write bubble letters, this is a really good way to practice. Just write your word and then outline it. Outline every letter, and you'll learn exactly how it works to create those letters with negative space in the middle instead of having the actual word in the middle. So anyway, another little tip of the day. So I'm writing these words: God, brave, and fear, because God will often put us in, invite us, maybe is a nicer word, or we find ourselves in situations that really call us to face fear. In Esther's case, her uncle Mordecai was asking her to go ahead and petition the king. But there was only one law in the land, and that was you don't petition the king if you're not invited. And she had never been invited. She had been a part of his harem. She had been through all of the beauty treatments and everything that was to go along with that, but she had never been invited into his court. And Mordecai was saying, you need to go. You need to plead on behalf of your people, the Israelites, that he would have mercy on us. And Esther originally said no. She, it doesn't say that she was fearful, but we can imagine she was, because she said, wait a minute, there's this law. If I go before him, he can choose to kill me. And Mordecai said, basically, does that really matter? You will, you're doing God's work. Does that really matter? And it also says that, that even if she chooses not to go before the king, that God's plans will persevere. They will happen. He will free his people, but it won't happen through Esther. And she won't be delivered, and her family won't be delivered. They will be killed. So in a way, she was facing kind of a catch-22. Do I face the king and consider death, or do I kind of stand in the law of the land and in this rule that I know that this king has, and stay kind of in fear of that, and know that God will accomplish things without me, because goodness knows God can do whatever he wants to do without us, right, you guys? But sometimes he chooses us to do the hard things, to teach us things, to make us brave, to show us his glory and his majesty and his power and his dominion and miracles. So when we're up against something where we have to choose bravery or fear, it's really a chance to see God shine through and come through for us. And it may take time. Esther's plan took time to come about, but it worked. So I'm just journaling over here. I'll read to you what I'm journaling. That God uses us ordinary people for kingdom purposes. We can always trust his ways, even if they don't make sense in our human understanding. Then I journaled about being brave. When stepping into scary situations or new uncharted waters, we can be extra brave because the God of all goes before us and prepares the way. What Esther didn't know is that God was preparing the court. He was preparing, he was making plans so that she could go safely before the king. She didn't know that at the time. She just had to trust it, which is often the case. And then I put fear. It is a choice, but it comes with consequences. But ultimately, it won't stop God's plans because God's in control, right? And so he's going to make his plans follow through. But sometimes if we choose fear, there will be consequences, maybe just for us, maybe for people that we love, maybe for a group of people, maybe for a kingdom of people. So we really need to decide where we're going to put our allegiance and our faith. Are we going to put it in bravery, or are we going to stay stuck in fear? And you guys, I'm telling you, I went through that with this kiddo that I was advocating for, but I've gone through this summer too. And so I'm not just talking the talk, I'm walking the walk with you guys. And then this other page over here, stand in your third day clothes. It talks about how on the third day she put on her robes and she did the plan, and the plan worked. So I want you guys to really know that we have third day robes because Jesus died for us and he rose on the third day. Put on those robes and be brave and go forth and do that thing that you want to stay stuck in fear for. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, you guys. Bye-bye.